Hi, today we'll be talking about iterations. So, iterations or looping is something that's essential to programming. Um, so, you can think of why we use iterations, right? We use them to save time because we want to perform a action a bunch of times, but we don't want to write it out every single time. And iterations actually commonly loop through lists, which we talked about previously in another video. So I'll give you an example of when you could use an iteration instead of doing whatever I'll show you that I'm going to do now. So let's say your list is hi, bye, and then like no, something like that, right? It doesn't have to be complicated. And now let's say we want to print each index in the list. Well, if we want to do this, we have to do the exact same thing 3 times, right? Which is a pain. You could print the first index, print the second index, then print the third index, or print the 0th index, print the first index, and print the second index. So this should just print out each value, each item inside the list, one by one. Sorry, give it 1 second. The session's starting. So yeah, it printed out each of these strings one by one, since you did the print commands one by one. And right now it's okay since there's only 3 items in the list. But what if the list is like a thousand values inside the list? Then it wouldn't be really feasible to do this one by one, right? So you could use something called a for loop. So a for loop has it loops through anything, right? It loops through a certain thing, and it goes one by one. So I'll show you what I mean. So this is the basic notation for a for loop. Print. So what this actually for loop is the way the syntax for a for loop is for a variable in the actual list or a word, a string, or whatever. We'll talk about lists for now. So for a variable in the list, print the variable. And there's always a colon here to indicate that whatever's below it is part of the for loop. And anything underneath that colon that's indented is part of the for loop. So if you want to do more code outside of the for loop, then you have to delete the indentation on the next time you start coding. And then why we use a variable here, right? Is because we want to go through each item in the list. Since this variable is not defined yet, it automatically goes to the first item in the list. Since we literally told it that we're looking in the list. So the for loop is designed to go one by one on the values. Like it's supposed to look one by one at the values of the list. That's what this for x in list means. And then we use x here because if we want to later manipulate each item in the list some way, we have to use x again, since we know that the first time we loop through, we're only looking at the first item. So then we can manipulate the first item again in the for underneath the for line, right? So here we can do other stuff to the x, right? Um, so what this essentially tells us is the first line tells us that we're looking at every item in the list. And then the second line tells us what we're doing each time we look at each item. So essentially this will just print out every single item in the list. Right. We can do the same thing with a string. So it's pretty much the same thing. String equals hello, right? And then it's the same format for a variable, and this variable can be anything. You just have to be consistent. You have to use the same variable when you're starting the for loop, and then also in the commands that you execute under the for loop. A lot of people choose to use a variable that's indicative of something, whatever they're looping, to tell them what exactly they're doing. But any variable works. I like to use x since it's simple. So again, you have to tell it what you're looping through, right? And that's what this is. And then this indicates that you're looping through every single digit inside the string. So if it's a string, it automatically loops through every single character in the string. Again, you need the colon because it automatically indents for you when you have a colon. And also it tells you that whatever's below it that's indented is what you're doing. And then you print the X. It's the same thing. So you're doing this every single time you loop through it. And then it should print each letter out. So you could actually loop without like a list or a string, and the way to do that is using something called range. So range essentially tells you like how many times you loop. So if your range is 4, then you loop 4 times, because you can think about it as range of index. So in a list, right, we have indexes, right, indices, and string, same thing, we have indices, and that just tells us the position of each character or item in the list. And essentially, if your range is just 4, then you're just looping through the first 4 indices. So what that means is if you're looping through range 4, then you're looping through the x equals 0, and where x is the index, x equals 0, x equals 1, x equals 2, x equals 3. And I'll just show you what that looks like. So for x equal in range 4, right? Print. Okay. Something better. So this is better for if you're actually repeating the same thing over and over, or if you want to do something in numerical order, right? Because you're not actually looping through a list, so it won't change randomly. Like the thing that you're looking at won't change in a random manner. So when you're looping through a list, you first look at high and then you look at by. So these aren't like really related, right? It depends on what your list is. But when you're looping through a range, we know that the first thing we're looking at is 0. The second thing we're looking at is x equals 1. The third thing we're looking at is x equals 2, etc. So we know exactly what x will be, except because, yeah. But in a list, the x, or what we're looking at each time we loop through, is different. It depends on the list. So this is better for like just repeating the same thing a lot of times. For example, this, or if you want to do something with x in numerical order. So if you print out x, then as you can see, it's just the first couple indices in numerical order. And when this x actually matters in the actions you perform, then you can actually adjust the range and tell it what index you want to start at and what index you want to end at. So let's say 3 to 5. Then you'll start at 3 and at 4, or 3 to 8. Then you'll start at 3 and end at 7. So basically, it tells 3 to 8 is 8 minus 3 equals 5. So there's going to be 5. It's going to loop 5 times, and it's going to end before it reaches 8. That's essentially what this range means. And then this only matters if you're actually using x inside the actions underneath the list. So let's say you do this and you also have for x in range 4. If we're just doing an action over and over again, these two will do it the same amount of times, right? So both of these should output the exact same thing. See, this one printed hello 4 times and this one printed hello 4 times. And then finally, there's another type of loop that we should discuss, which is called the while loop. And it kind of replaces the for range loops, because it's for repeating. It's basically you're repeating an action until a condition is met. So let's say we had start with I equals 0 or x equals 0, right? Let's say we had a while loop that says, well, x is less than 5. And it's the same notation again. So you have the terminology, the while, and then you have your condition, and then you have the colon again because it denotes that everything else occurs during the loop. Let's say you want to print x, right? Or print x, sure. So what this tells us is as long as x is less than 5, then we want to do this action underneath. And right now, x is staying at 0, right? We don't have anything that affects the value of x. So this will continue forever. So this is an infinite loop. However, if we have, that's why usually when we're doing while loops, we have to add something that looks like this. So what this actually means right here is x plus equals 1 means you add 1 to x after every time you loop it. So after the first time before you loop it, x equals 0, and then you print x. And then at the end of the loop, you add 1 to x. So the next time you look at the loop, x equals 1. So by the time it reaches 5, then it stops looping. And this also allows us to control the number of times we loop. Since if we do x equals plus equals 5 or like 10 or something, then after the first loop, it won't loop anymore. But if you do 1, then it will loop until it reaches 5, and then it will stop. So a while loop is very controlled. And then this should just print out the first 4 since we're doing it 5 times.